You walk into an old pre-war building. Even with all of the time that has passed, it looks almost as if it would have all of those years ago. You walk towards the front desk, seeing several rangers standing around. As you walk up, you are stopped by a ranger who says to you,
"I've heard of you. I'm glad you're here to help us out. This is a delicate matter. We've got a lot to do to prepare for the president's visit and not much time. Once we start, we'll be on a strict timetable. Are you ready?"
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we are going to discuss the new Californian Republic. More specifically, their rise from the former Californian desert to their potential fall at the end of Fallout New Vegas, deciding whether or not this faction is problematic. To do this, we must first discuss the history of the NCR, including their origin story. Then we move on to their values. So what are their laws and beliefs? And also moving on to what makes the NCR potentially problematic. To begin, we should start with the origins of the NCR. The origins of the NCR actually begin in a vault. More specifically, Vault 15. So for this, we must start with a brief history of Vault 15. This begins in 2054 with Project Safehouse. This would be the project that would cause the construction of the vaults as a way to protect a future population in the event of something going wrong. And in the later part of 2054, the construction of the vaults would begin. These vaults were built rather rapidly due to the continued advancements in technology that were seen at the time. Now we move into the August of 2063. This is when the construction of Vault 15 would be completed. This is when you would start to see the apocalypse is coming drills, which would cause many to stop believing in the sirens over time. There would be relative calm throughout the former United States for the next several years on the Vault side of things, this being until the 23rd of October 2077. And as this is when the sirens would sound again, but not for a drill this time. No, this was for real. This would be the day the bombs would drop and nuclear fallout would happen. Now, with the people that did believe in the danger and went into the safety of the vault, the door would still shut behind them. However, many didn't believe it, so those that were sealed in the safety would wait out the dangers of the wastes in the supposed safety of the vault. However, what they did not know is that by being members of the vault, they were also unknowing participants in an experiment being run by Vault-Tec. Now, this experiment was designed to test how people of all different cultures and religions would do when packed into a confined space to live out their days. And with this, the vault had no population control measures. So, by 2097, only a mere 20 years since the vault door sealed, the vault was rather overpopulated. So this is where things started getting cramped and uncomfortable. This led to a schism, which would lead many to leave the vault. So 2097 is the year that most likely everyone left, apart from a few unlucky settlers, including the Vipers, which are one of the 3 raider gangs coming from this vault. It also allows time for Shady Sands to be established by the time the Vault Dweller leaves the vault. In 2145, Tandy would be born. She is the daughter of the leader of Shady Sands, Aradesh. She would grow up in a small but thriving community. This would be until the 15th of December 2161, as this is when the Vault Dweller would stumble upon Shady Sands. This is also around the time Tandy would end up being taken by raiders. Shady Sands had been facing constant issues with raiders, however, this being the most severe attack they had ever faced. The Vault Dweller would of course save Tandy from the Khans, destroying the raiders' settlement that would have prevented this settlement from expanding into the state we know it as today. Moving on to 2186, this is when Shady Sands would become the new Californian Republic, or the NCR. At this time, they would have a trial council-based government. This was done to help create their constitution. 4 more settlements would join this council to create the original NCR. And by 2189, the NCR would truly exist, being voted into existence and leading to the 5 federated states of the NCR, these being known as the Boneyard, Dayglow or Glow, the Hub, Maxon, and of course, Shady Sands. The NCR would grow stronger over the years, and eventually after the initial guidance of Aradesh, the torch of leadership would be passed on in the year 2196. This is when Tandy would be first elected to become president of the NCR, being of course unanimously voted in by the council. This would start a rather prosperous era for the towns within the NCR, along with, in 2198, Shady Sands being officially declared the capital of NCR. Under Tandy's impressively long reign as the president of the NCR, much of this was focused on rebuilding infrastructure along with having positive outside trading relationships. This is where the NCR became the main supplier throughout the wastelands of the meat and the leather through Brahmin farming. The beginning of the expansion attempts would really begin in February in the year 2241. This is where the NCR would invite Vault City to join in an alliance with the NCR. This offer was not exactly welcomed by Vault City, who enjoyed their independence. The NCR at this time was not above certain alliances to encourage cooperation, using their ties with New Reno to further encourage the participation of Vault City. But anyway, even after this rejection, the NCR would continue to prosper under the rule of Tandy, this being up until the year 2248, as this would be when Tandy would pass away peacefully after becoming sick at the age of 103. This is where the role of president would change hands to her vice president, Joanna Tibbett. With Tandy's death, this is where the NCR would really begin their policies surrounding expansion and lose their original basis surrounding caring for their own people. In the 2240s and 2250s, the Brotherhood of Steel and the NCR would begin to have their disagreements. This is where the origins of the NCR Brotherhood War would begin, with the actual fighting beginning in the late 2250s to early 2260s, this being mostly over disagreements on the use of technology. However, the major battles and losses would be in the years after this. Back to Joanna Tibbett, as her presidency would not last long, being booted out when she would have what was declared as a poor response to 38 NCR residents dying at the hands of Mojave Raiders in the year 2253. She was booted out of office and replaced with President Wendell Peterson. President Peterson, out for blood, orders 3 battalions of NCR infantry, this being for the pacification of the Mojave. This operation would be completed in the year 2270, and is where the General Aaron Kimball would become famous, being seen as the hero of the people of the NCR. In 2272, the NCR would establish their own outpost in the Mojave, further creeping in to new territories and managing their expansions. And now, in 2273, this is when Aaron Kimball would leave the military and decide to take up politics instead, running as a governor for the hub. With his background as a military hero, it is easy to see why he won his seat. 2 months after his transition into politics, he would take Peterson's spot as president once Peterson is voted out. Now we move on and into the Hoover Dam, more specifically the first battle for it. The setup for the first Hoover Dam battle would begin in the year 2274, with guerrilla campaigns occupying the area. This is where we would have an initial treaty signed between the NCR and Mr. House, along with the 3 families of course. This would allow the strip to open for business, as Hoover Dam begins to power the strip along with NCR sites. In 2276, the issues between the NCR and the Brotherhood would continue to escalate. This is when we would see the launch of Operation Sunburst, this essentially being the battle between the Brotherhood and the NCR over the Helios 1 site. This is where the Brotherhood would be defeated and considered neutralized in the Mojave. Hiding at the bunker, you would see them later in as the Courier, with the NCR taking over the former Poseidon Energy solar plant. This would set the stage for the next year, with yet another battle to be faced by the NCR. However, in 2277, this instead would be the first battle for Hoover Dam, this being due to an attack by the Legion, who also desired control over this source of power. Eventually, after much losses on both sides, the NCR would win and would continue to control Hoover Dam. However, this is not the end of the problems for the NCR, continuing to make enemies in this area, as in the year 2278, they would gain the hatred of the Great Khans.
That's a complicated question. They've done horrible things to our people, to be sure, and I've gladly killed many of their soldiers in battle.
This is due to the NCR retaliating over the behavior of the Great Khans. They had initially abducted and killed 4 members of the NCR troops, leading to the NCR massacring several dozens of the men, women, and children who were part of the Great Khans over at Red Rock Canyon, causing much animosity between the Great Khans and the NCR. However, the civilians in the NCR would not hear a word about this. So now that we know how the NCR began and what their actions were up until the start of Fallout New Vegas, now we should discuss their values both in the beginning and as time has passed. The original NCR vastly differs from that we see in the years of New Vegas. We see this greatly if we look at the changes in behavior of the NCR along with their frequent practice of making enemies in the more recent years. Their original values, laws, and approaches changed rapidly after the death of President Tandy. The NCR in the initial years stood for peace, security, and justice for its people. We see this with their initial work and their initial laws. The NCR originally strived to put the welfare of its people above progress. They had laws that protected their people, prohibiting various things like slavery, even going as far as having the NCR Rangers, who were a group of soldiers who were there throughout the wastelands as a way of protecting the people, even having safe houses throughout the wastelands as well for this purpose. These Rangers would go and fight the slavers outside of the NCR territory. In the original NCR, all were welcome, as long as they were willing to abide by the laws, which meant that there were on occasion mutants and ghouls within the cities of the NCR. The NCR also, unlike many other communities, used an election system, somewhat resembling that of the United States before the bombs dropped. This allowing all of the towns who had joined to send their own representatives to the council to decide on important matters. The NCR also at this time had the strongest and largest army in the wasteland, which is why they were able to successfully wage their campaigns against slavers, cannibals, and raiders, who they felt were daring to endanger the citizens of the NCR, these being either killed by the army or arrested and thrown into an NCR jail. But with Tandy's laws, there was no torturing of prisoners. So it's likely that even in jail under the NCR at this time, it would have been nicer than some of the other areas in the wasteland. Much of the focus of the original NCR was on how to support their growing population. Considering there were actually many who were interested in the way of life of the NCR, part of this focus was on repairing pre-war infrastructure to provide housing for the citizens of the NCR, along with repairing the roads and railways to establish new potential routes of transport for their members. This was not their only focus though. They also focused on creating prosperous trade relationships, which we see with the Brahmin farms in Fallout 2, along with their Brahmin farmers in New Vegas. Under Tandy's rules, there were also very strict guides on Brahmin farming, essentially giving everyone a fair go and promoting healthy competition. This prevented one person from buying out all of the other farmers through dodgy tactics. However, we see that this, along with many of the other rules, like their restrictions on gambling, loosening after the death of Tandy, and with the changing of hands to less, skilled presidents, this being evident with the struggles between Heck Gunderson and Walter Phoebus.
What more you want? He's a slithering snake, what he is. One of the biggest landowners this side of the Colorado, and it's all stolen, I tell you. All that money buys him any NCR senators he wants. Scoundrels like heck. There's just no way for us small folks to get by, much less prosper, kid.
With the changes in leadership, the more expansionist era of the NCR would be in full swing. There would no longer be the caring nature of the welfare of the collective, with the NCR and its people now being more focused on the prosperity of the individual. We see this with the removal of Tandy's regulations, limiting the amount of Brahmin and the amount of land. We see the rise of Brahmin barons and agri barons. These are the groups that are also paying the senators off to allow for less than desired behaviors. Under Tandy's rule, ghouls and supermutants were legally protected in a law that was passed in 2205. However, after her death, the enforcement of this is not really seen. We see the NCR, who were supposed to be the faction of equal opportunity, does not live up to this under Aaron Kimball. Instead, the opportunities have mostly died out, leading to many to become workers under the various employers within the NCR, rather than attempting to start their own thing. We also see that once powerful and well-respected military becoming more of an embarrassment under Kimball, even with his constant pushing of patriotism and heroism. This in part being due to the constant force needed to occupy Hoover Dam and control the Mojave, along with the massive losses of life in the first battle of Hoover Dam, where this addition of the NCR was not really seen as a massive gain, but more of a waste of resources by many. It costs more taxes considering they do not receive revenue from that region, with the treaty signed between the NCR and Mr. House. So, the newer version of the NCR values expansion more than its own community, unlike the original NCR. Now that we know about what the NCR values, we should discuss what the issues with the NCR are. The issues with the NCR really begin after the passing of Tandy. Yes, her attempts to force Vault City into joining were problematic, to say the least. However, during her time, they had the Rangers, who were there to help people throughout the wastelands, along with the rules that allowed for more equal opportunities and the rebuilding of infrastructure to house and support the NCR citizens. But after her passing, when the response by Joanna Tibbett was seen as subpar, This is where the desire for power would truly begin within the NCR, and the expansionist policies would really take place. The pacification of the Mojave campaign did lead to the gain of fame for Aaron Kimball, and without this, he may have actually never been elected as the president of the NCR, as he did use his military service and hero status as his campaign for governor. Although being a general in the military, he is not truly set up for presidency. After all, he spent less than 2 months in politics before gaining the position, meaning out of all the politicians that could have led, he was the least equipped politically. Yes, he had an understanding of military, but it is unlikely that he knew much of what the public needed and how to run a country outside of a war campaign. We do see in his time, this is where much of the squabbles and battles between the NCR and other factions would begin, as the focus was further turned away from the original values of the NCR and more on the expansion through military action. We see the constant force and military being problematic, making former allies into enemies, considering one of the original states of the NCR was Maxon, this being the area surrounding the Lost Hills bunker, which most likely is no longer a very willing, due to the area being heavily influenced by the Brotherhood of Steel. We also see a blind eye being turned away from land theft from characters like Heck, allowing the Brahmin Baron to lie, cheat, and steal his way into riches, whilst paying off the politicians, of course. So, is the NCR a problematic faction? In the initial years of the faction, they were not problematic, considering they were created more as a way of protecting the fellow members of the Wastelands, along with establishing a true civilization within the Wastes. However, with the passing of time, we can begin to see the cracks starting to surface. Although Tandy's focus was primarily on taking care of her fellow Wastelanders and NCR citizens, we can begin to see some issues. This being, of course, with the attempt to force Vault City to join or align with the NCR. However, the majority of her time as president of the NCR, we do see mostly positive outcomes and changes made for those that were part of the NCR. This being especially with the abolishing of slavery and freeing of slaves from slavers nearby the NCR through the use of the NCR Rangers, along with a sense of community established with the NCR, where everyone was treated with respect and given a fair go. However, after her death, much of the good she caused rapidly breaks down. We see this especially with the NCR senators being bribed by people like Heck, and allowing him to essentially force people off their lands with threats. We also see this with the expansionist behaviors trying to take over New Vegas as another state within the NCR. With this, you may also consider the government somewhat incompetent and corrupt, considering that according to Walter Phoebus, barons like Heck are essentially able to pay off the politicians to get what they want, along with both the cutting of the ties and aggravating of others. The once alliance they had between the NCR and the Brotherhood we see in Fallout New Vegas is no longer. Instead, they have fought a war against each other. This war highlighting that the NCR have changed in parts for the worse. With this turning away from what the NCR once valued, the politicians who were elected to lead the people, ensuring their safety and prosperity, would truly work to line their own pockets and make names for themselves. With the more than 400 deaths of not just NCR soldiers but also civilians, these being from the continued fighting with the local tribes along with the first battle for Hoover Dam, gone are the days where the president of the NCR was respected by outsiders, with Tandy being viewed by tribals in her time as a saint, and even called the Great Mother by some. With President Kimball's constant desire to expand through violence rather than alliance, he and his military are no longer well respected as they once were. So the NCR in more recent times are a problematic faction. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to share it with someone, as I am literally up late recording this on my 25th birthday instead of partying. Yes, I know, half the games I talk about are older than me, but they just don't make them like they used to. So let me know in the comments, do you think the NCR are problematic? If you enjoyed this video, then you will enjoy this one. It is about Vault 15, its origins, and who actually deserves this vault.